Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshifted.net/343, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshifted.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, it is a tour preview, the fall 2023 tour preview, the Delaware Double Cross. So if you recall, if you've been with the show for any length of time, but preferably at least to the beginning of the year, that I made a whole bunch of bike touring goals. Stay tuned. I think we're going to be reviewing those down the line. One of those goals was to cross a new state by bicycle. I have crossed a bunch of different states. One of these days, I'm going to have to make that list again, probably maybe in the follow-up for all of this down the line. But new state. I needed a new state. I had plenty to choose from, but I decided to pick one that was, well, frankly, going to be a little bit on the easier side, and that is the great state of Delaware. It is a reasonably close state for me to get to from where I live in Washington, D.C., and it is, well, let's be honest, not exactly the widest state in the world. Now, for those of you who are like going, Tim, you're really kind of cheating here or whatever, I have crossed some pretty big states. We're talking your Californias, not east to west, but north to south. I mean, I have done some big state crossings here, so I'll take my skinny state here for this particular one. As it turned out, I had a great plan. As you all know, and I've done this on a recent episode, I've gone through sort of what my bike touring planning process can look like. Sometimes I go through a lot of planning and end up just essentially ditching it all for a variety of different reasons or making major modifications. But I thought it would be worthwhile in this preview episode to talk about what my abandoned initial plan was, because I still think it was kind of cool and it would have been, in a sense, my preferred method of doing it, except for the reason why I abandoned it. Does that make sense? I hope it does. It does to me. What it originally was going to be was it was going to be an all transit and bicycle adventure. I was going to be starting in Washington, D.C., where I live, ride my Brompton from home to Union Station and get to the MARC rail, which is, of course, the commuter rail that goes up into Maryland. And I was going to take that to its northern terminus beyond Baltimore up in Perryville, Maryland. The nice thing about that is it really gets you quite a bit away from both cities. It's actually, if you're in the area and you're interested in really moving for the cheap, MARC rail is a great way to do it. MARC, and no, I have no idea what it stands for. Maryland something. Regional, probably. I have no idea. Anyways, from there, the plan was I could have tried to start biking from there, but it would have been, I think, too long of a day to pull off the way that I wanted to. And as we'll talk in a bit here, the cycling to get to where I needed to go ends up having some problems. So I was going to take a bus from there, one of the county buses. I cannot remember which county it is up there. And that was going to get me to Elkton, Maryland. Elkton, which is right off of I-95. You may, if you've ever driven in and around Baltimore or DC or through both cities on your way down to Florida or something like that, you may remember Elkton. Elkton is very close to the border of Maryland and Delaware. Very, very close. In fact, it's very close also to Newark, Delaware. And we know it's pronounced Newark, Delaware, because it is. It just is. Anyways, from there, I was going to be riding across to Delaware City, which is right on the river, which separates Delaware from New Jersey. It's effectively kind of the coast at that point. The Chesapeake Bay is a little bit further south. That is the end there. And that would get me across the entire state of Delaware, therefore checking my box. And from there were a bunch of different interesting choices, but the one that I really chose was, you know what, I took MARC rail from there to DC, and I thought just reversing and taking all these kind of squirrely buses and whatnot, maybe I didn't want to do that. And I realized that there was a pretty decent route from there up to Wilmington, Delaware, which is of course the largest city in the state, and that has an Amtrak station, so I could grab Amtrak back to DC. Sounded pretty good. It was nice mileage. It was a good, luxurious bit of riding. It checked the box. It would have been in areas that I've never cycled before. why didn't I end up going with this? Well, safety. To go back to another recent episode of the pod, the bike situation in and around Elkton, Maryland was even dicier than the Florida sidewalk shoulder riding I've been doing, and that's pretty marginal to begin with. So I did a lot of looking at Google Street View and my typical kind of planning process, and that revealed a ton of different, well, I shouldn't say a ton. It revealed some options, but the more that I scratched the surface, and what I would do is, as I've mentioned before on the podcast, is I would show the street view as if I were cycling. And I was finding that unlike in Florida, where on some pretty busy roads and where I'm utilizing sidewalks a lot to get across major intersections, there has always been a crosswalk where I can safely and easily hit the button, cross, make sure that any vehicular traffic is going to be honoring that crosswalk and those lights. I didn't have that in a couple of very key places in Elkton, which was really surprising. Interesting to think of a place like that having even worse infrastructure for pedestrians and bikes than Central Florida. Amazing. But I was thinking about, well, why don't I just go for it? And I thought back to my safety episode and I thought, you know what? It's a death by 1,000 cuts when it comes to safety. I think anytime you're in and around traffic when they're not expecting a bicycle, I think that you're taking a certain degree of risk. I mean, you're taking a degree of risk the second you get on a bicycle anyways, but in that situation where it's not only would they not be expecting me, but there isn't even the most basic of infrastructures of crosswalks to help me get across pretty major highway. I think it was US 40 there. That was the point where I was sort of like, you know what? Maybe I should rethink this. And by that point, of course, I had put in, a couple of hours at least of research and whatnot. And it was a bit of a bummer because I thought at that point, maybe I just don't have a route to make this work. And the route across Delaware was actually really nice. So I'll get into that in a moment. And I thought, why can't I just kind of make that work? And then that's when the light bulb went off. And I said, well, why don't I just drive there? So the LaCrosse makes a reappearance in the podcast. And I just drove up there because there is a fantastic trailhead. It's the Mike Castle Trail. It starts in Chesapeake City, Maryland. And that would have been a place I would have been riding through with the original plan. But there's a great parking lot there. It's basically built for folks to drive in with their bikes attached to their cars and to ride this trail. And so I thought the whole idea of this is not some grand urban adventure loop. The plan for all of this is to cross a state. And well, by starting and ending there, that ended up being how I did it. So simpler off-road option, drive to Chesapeake City, Maryland. By the way, delightful little town. Park there, ride the Mike Castle Trail to Delaware City, which was the original plan. By the way, another delightful town, along the Delaware and Chesapeake Canal to the Delaware River and back. So that ends up being an amazing kind of little adventure. Is it as prolific? It's certainly fewer miles than what my original plan was, but at the same time, it was also a lot safer. And I think in the end, a lot more enjoyable as a plan, at least. 30 miles of total riding. So just 15 miles out and 15 miles back. So we're talking a day trip here. Even calling this any kind of a tour or whatever is a little bit of an overstatement. Of course, no overnighting, no anything like that. Riding the Brompton, I decided to stick with the Brompton because, again, I still haven't really fully repaired my bike. My larger bike from the summer adventure. No, I know it's kind of crazy. I literally have not ridden it since I got back. So that's something that needs to change very clearly. So the Brompton, which has been doing all of my riding adventures this summer, obviously without having to have to do any overnights or anything like that. I don't need to bring tents or anything like that. We're talking very minimal gear. I'm bringing snacks and water. The weather, well, when you're doing a planning trip like this in the fall, the weather can be, really hot. Could be actually really cold, could be rainy. It's one of those things where in the mid-Atlantic in the early fall, you really have to be mindful of any possibility. And so the plan with that is, to be honest, the gear that comes with you in that kind of a situation is going to be very, very dependent on what the weather forecast is for that particular day. So stay tuned for the tour journal for more on what ended up happening with all of that. You'll notice I'm talking about this as I'm kind of flitting back and forth. I'm trying to pretend that this is a preview, but the reality is I already did this. So trying to say this episode in a way like it's coming. I haven't even done this. Oh, I don't even know how this went, but I already know how it went. So that was the weather. Some really cool towns to explore. Like I had mentioned, both the city of Chesapeake City, Maryland, and Delaware City, Delaware. Brand new towns to me. And I do have to say, I've already said that they're kind of delightful little towns, but really, really glad that I got to do some new cities, towns, whatever we want to say. And of course, trail towns all have their own type of charm. A lot of trail towns on, say, the Erie Canal Trail, where I literally grew up in one of them. You've got a lot of fun possibilities in those places, especially if you're on a bike and you're like, hey, let me stop for a beer or get an ice cream or something like that. Preview for next week's episode. Lots of that kind of opportunity there. And you better believe I can take advantage of that kind of stuff. There was no camping or overnighting, as I mentioned. This is just a little adventure that checks a box. And the other thing that's kind of cool about that and goes to the name of this is that I ended up, because I didn't have a lot of mileage just to kind of drive there, I decided to do it as a loop. So I ended up crossing Delaware twice, therefore Delaware Double Cross. It's a skinny state. I'm not going to lie to you here. 15 miles across from border to effective border at that point to the waterfront. But it checks a box. And I say that is hashtag not cheating. I recognize this is a super short episode this week, but rather than just sort of pile up extra stuff into an episode, I'd rather make it just be this tour journal preview. I do want to say, last week I had mentioned that I've got some great episodes coming up for the month of November. I want to mention that, of course, we've got this tour journal that's going to be coming next week. That also is going to include the takeaways from that particular tour, which rather than stretch this out into 3 episodes, I think it kind of makes a little more sense to do it in 2. But I do want to mention that wonderful little interview that I kind of said, it hasn't happened yet. I don't want to announce it until it happens. Well, it's happened. The week after the tour journal, it's going to be the final episode for the month of November. A fantastic interview with Biking Brian. If you are not familiar with Biking Brian, go check him out on YouTube, because he is really the best example of bicycle adventures and touring on an electric bike. His e-bike adventures are really legendary. He's in the middle of telling one right now through video on his YouTube channel. And I really wanted to have a discussion with him about touring, adventuring on an e-bike and everything that goes into it. Gets a little bit nerdy, a little bit into the weeds, but I think it's going to be a fantastic, fantastic discussion for you to enjoy. That is coming as the final episode of the month. And let me also give you a preview, but this time again, I can't do it because we have not nailed this down, but the holiday special this year is going to be even more special than it has in years past, if this is going to happen the way that I want it to. So I'll just leave it at that. I think that for listeners of the Pedal Shift Project who have been around for a while in particular, you're really going to enjoy the holiday spectacular this year. All right, enough of my previewing. Hope you have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week for the Tour Journal.
And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community. Expanding into live shows and covering new tours, if you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Didis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemas, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullough, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Hattie Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Azuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponsella, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Cyrus Faravar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.